So hi, I'm Dan, and I'm excited to present my first paper of my PhD today that I wrote with my fantastic co-author, Basoah, and the rest of my collaborators, Not Like Us Hunty, measuring perceptions and behavioral effects of minoritized anthropomorphic cues in LLMs. So to start, AI systems currently are widely used in different domains, medicine, policy, etc. They have lots of potential, and it's very exciting to see all the work here at FACT and LLMs developing in general. They can do tons of different tasks, work over different modularities and scenarios, and they collaborate with us humans every day. However, we find usually the language they speak, or at least that we let them speak, is usually not as exciting. So for example, every time when you go to an AI system like ChatGPT or Gemini, they might ask you a pretty general question of, hello, how can I assist you today? While these types of systems are designed to be straightforward and direct to the point, they can come across as unengaging or bland, and may also not be accessible to a wider variety of users. So what we're thinking is, what if we change the language of AI systems through personalization or anthropomorphism, while having AI respond with a human-like tone that fits the user style? Will this alleviate or solve some of these problems? So for example, if your AI instead says, hey, what's up? This definitely sounds a bit more friendly and approachable, which helps the user engage with the system more effectively. Okay, but let's take a second. What if we do this for users who identify as part of a minority group? So for example, what if the AI starts talking to me out of nowhere like, yes, Henny, work it, queen, like, what? That might raise some potential risks, right? So with LLMs being exaggerating and mocking like in this way, as an attempt to be personable, they instead come across as offensive, potentially homophobic, racist, and so on. So making AI more human-like is truly a double-edged sword. And as members of my research team, as queer researchers, as Black researchers, we ourselves have personally encountered these types of responses in our previous works with AI, and therefore are interested in seeing out this problem further. So to more explicitly define one of these risks, one is that the risk is that LLMs will start speaking a sociolect, which is a dialect of a particular social class or group, usually centered around an identity, such as race, sexuality, or socioeconomic status. So an example of this is AE, or African American English, or queer slang. So when humans speak other sociolect, this is considered cultural appropriation and very offensive. But what about when LLMs do so? Are the risks still similar here? Will the users still rely and trust and perceive the LLM as they should, or is it still also offensive? So this is the main drive of our research. In order to address these concerns, we are interested in observing how users behave when engaging with a sociolectal LLM, observing how users themselves feel about the sociolectal agent, and then also asking other opinions users have of sociolect agents, pretty much like our title. So using these aims, we investigate users' perceptions of LLMs with the following questions. First, we're interested in whether the users rely more on a standard English agent or an agent in their sociolect. Next, we observe how perception variables depend on whether the user is interacting with the standard agent or the sociolect agent. And then third, we're curious to see if any patterns between these perception variables and the reliance rate exist, to see if conscious feelings that users have are affected by the subconscious choices they make. So for our method, to do this, we ran 2 IRB-approved surveys with 985 participants, roughly 490 for each of the subgroups we have for AE participants and for queer slang participants. So the survey starts off with a few initial questions around the user's background and use of sociolect, and then we have them watch a series of videos and answer a few follow-up questions regarding after each video. And this study setup is grounded in similar work done by Kaitlyn and Zhou, where they were evaluating user reliance. It's a similar setup. And then at the end of the survey, the user gets to explicitly pick which agent they prefer, and then in an open-ended response, justify their decision. And we do this using counterbalancing, so some participants talk to agents in different orders. Okay, so instead of interacting with actual LLMs, the LLM responses were also collected using a template-based AI agent, but I will leave that for the paper because it was a very methodological process. But for the types of questions we were asking the users as seen here, the users either got the option to decide yes to accept the agent response or no to not accept the agent response. And this is the exact same question, but in red you see the standard English agent response, and in sociolect, the blue, you see the respective sociolect response. Okay, so now for our results. For our first question, we found that, surprisingly, AAE speakers relied more on the non-AAE agent over the AAE agent, whereas for queer slang speakers, they seem to rely on both sort of similarly. What this means is that AAE speakers were actually more likely to accept an agent response if it was not speaking AAE, thus demonstrating an underlying behavioral preference for a more standard, less personal response. Next, we wanted to see if the users perceived and explicitly preferred one agent over the other. Here we found that, more generally, AAE participants had more positive perceptions of the SAE agent, and here the check mark indicates a significant preference for one agent over the other. And then for why we chose these specific perception variables, we have justifications in our paper. So this is for AAE participants. For queer slang participants, we found that the perceptions between the two agents were more mixed, with only a slight preference for the SAE agent. So overall, these findings differ greatly between the two sociolect groups we looked at. AAE speakers overall perceive SAE agent better, whereas for queer slang, the participants were more mixed. So it appears that the speakers of different sociolects seem to have different perceptions about an agent. So for example, here we see that queer slang speakers are more likely to perceive a queer slang agent more positively. And then lastly, the perception findings are further supported by the user explicit preferences, where here we see that of the AE participants, more of them explicitly preferred the SAE agent over the AE agent. And as for queer slang, it was very close to 50-50. Okay, so next for our final research question, we're interested in seeing how these perception variables were associated with the reliance, so sort of combining our RQ1 and RQ2. So here we found that overall, most perception variables across both AE and queer slang participants were in fact positively associated with user behavior reliance on the respective agent. But then yeah, for the full breakdown, please see the rest of our paper. And then finally, for the open-ended questions, I just wanted to share some of the positive responses we had. So here we see that the AE participant said it's more fun to interact with. The queer slang participant said it's enjoying being called a diva. So overall, the perceptions are positive and they feel more personable with the LLM. And then we also had some negative responses where the AE and the queer slang participant sort of both felt like the use of the language was unnatural and almost sort of joking or mocking. And overall, like this gives a little like peek into sort of the breadth of findings and results across both the positive and the negatives of using sociolectal LLMs. So to summarize our study, we set up a survey with 985 participants and saw how they perceived and relied on sociolectal use of LLMs. Our results show how users disprefer anthropomorphic cues in language and actually prefer SAE systems as seen with the AE participants, and then how users expected LLM systems to be easy to use, but they don't necessarily expect the LLMs to speak the sociolect that they do. And then for users who explicitly preferred and perceived a certain LLM more positively, we then saw how they then relied on the LLMs more. And then lastly, the other difference is that not all sociolects are the same, as seen by our differences between the AE and the queer slang participants. So yeah, that is the end of my presentation. Thank you so much.